My son-in-law was laughing when I walked through the door on Thanksgiving. Not a nervous laugh, not a polite laugh, a real one, the kind that comes from the belly, the kind that means whoever's laughing feels completely safe, completely at home, completely certain they won't get caught. He didn't hear me come in. Nobody did. I'd been running late because of traffic on I-90, 20 minutes of stop and go outside of Columbus. And by the time I pulled into my daughter's driveway, the lights inside were already warm and the whole street smelled like wood smoke from a neighbor's chimney. I remember thinking that. I remember thinking it looked like a Christmas card. I should have known better. The front door was unlocked. My daughter always leaves it unlocked when she's expecting me, and I stepped into the entryway just as he was raising his glass. To finally having a holiday without the old man breathing down our necks, he said. The table erupted. My daughter's friends, her husband's co-workers, a couple I'd never met standing near the fireplace, all of them laughing, glasses up, eyes bright. I stood there in my coat, car keys still in my hand, and I didn't move. He saw me maybe 3 seconds later. I watched his face do the thing faces do when the bottom drops out, the color leaving, the smile freezing, the eyes going to my daughter, who had turned around and was looking at me with an expression I will never forget as long as I live. Not horror, not apology, calculation. I turned around and I left. My wife Eleanor died 4 years ago, a Tuesday in March. Pancreatic cancer 7 weeks from diagnosis to the end. She was 61. We'd been married 38 years. When she died, I didn't fall apart the way people expect you to. I kept the house clean. I kept showing up to my grandson's Little League games. I kept taking the car in for oil changes and mowing the lawn on Saturdays, and calling my daughter every Sunday at noon, which is what Eleanor and I had always done together, sitting at the kitchen table with coffee, the phone on speaker between us. After Eleanor died, I called alone. My daughter's name is Pam. She was 34 when her mother passed, already married 2 years to a man named Scott, living in a suburb of Columbus in a house with a 2-car garage and a yard she never went into. Scott sold software solutions to mid-sized logistics companies, which is a job I've never fully understood no matter how many times he explained it to me. He made good money, or said he did. Pam had quit her job at the hospital administration office when they got married, because Scott said there was no need for her to work. I didn't say what I thought about that at the time. Eleanor gave me a look that told me not to. The thing about Scott was that he was always pleasant to my face, always had a firm handshake, always remembered to ask about my knee surgery, always called me sir the first couple of years before he graduated to calling me by my first name without asking if that was all right. His name was Scott Mercer, and his parents lived in Arizona, and he'd grown up in Scottsdale and gone to Ohio State on a partial scholarship and graduated with a degree in business. He liked football and craft beer and had opinions about both that he shared freely and at length. Eleanor never trusted him. I used to tell her she was being hard on him. I used to tell her he was just young, that he'd settled down, that he was good to Pam, that what mattered was that Pam was happy. Eleanor would listen to all of that, and then she would get very quiet in that particular way of hers, and eventually she'd say, "I hope you're right," and I believed I was. I was a structural engineer for 32 years. I worked for the same firm in Columbus my entire career, started as a junior draftsman and retired as a senior project manager. I'm not a man who makes a lot of noise. I'm not a man who says things he doesn't mean or spends money he doesn't have or walks into a room and demands to be the center of it. I paid off our house in 2009, put enough away for a decent retirement, kept the life insurance current, made sure Eleanor and I had wills that were clear and properly filed. I don't say this to brag. I say it because it matters to what happened next. About 16 months after Eleanor died, Scott called me on a Wednesday afternoon. Not Pam, Scott. He said he wanted to take me to lunch. "Just the two of us," he said. "I've been meaning to catch up with you man to man." We went to a steakhouse he liked near downtown. He ordered the ribeye and a glass of bourbon and talked for 20 minutes about the Buckeyes before he got to the point. He and Pam were thinking about buying a bigger house. The neighborhood they were in was fine, but they'd outgrown it, or would outgrow it, because they were planning to start a family. The house they had their eye on was in a better school district. Good bones, needed some updating, but nothing structural. The price was $420,000. Their current mortgage was underwater by about $30,000. They had savings, but not enough for the down payment on the new place, not after accounting for the gap on the old one. The bank they'd talked to would approve them for the loan, but they needed a cosigner. Just as a formality, he said. Just to satisfy the underwriting requirements. It would be my name on the paper, but I'd never have to think about it again. He needed me to co-sign a mortgage for $350,000. I'm 67 years old now. I was 65 then. I had my retirement accounts, my pension, the paid-off house. I was not a rich man, but I was a careful one. Co-signing that loan meant that if Scott and Pam defaulted, for any reason at all, the lender could come after me. My savings, my house. I told him I needed to think about it. He nodded like that was perfectly reasonable and picked up the check and drove me back to my car and shook my hand and said, "No rush, whenever you're ready." That night I called Pam. She said it would mean so much to them. She said Scott had been stressed about money for months, and this would really help them get stable. She said it was just a formality, just a signature. They would never let me down. She said, "Dad, you know Scott? You know he's responsible." I did not sleep well that night. I thought about Eleanor getting quiet in that particular way of hers. I called my attorney the next morning. He walked me through the risk. He told me that legally, as a co-signer, I was equally responsible for the debt. He said he'd seen it go wrong before. He said I should make sure there was a written agreement between myself and Scott, separate from the mortgage documents, spelling out that if they missed payments or sold the house, I had a right to be notified and compensated for any damage to my credit or finances. I drafted that agreement. I had my attorney look at it. I sent it to Scott. He signed it without a word, which, at the time, I took as a good sign. 2 weeks later, I co-signed the mortgage. My daughter cried. Scott shook my hands and said I was a good man, and he meant it. He really did, and he was going to make me proud. I drove home and sat in Eleanor's chair for a while and looked out the window at the maple tree she'd planted in the front yard the year we moved in. It was October, and the leaves were going. I thought about how much she would have hated this arrangement. I thought about how she never trusted him and never said why, not in so many words, and I thought about how I had talked her out of her instincts and mine, and whether that made me wise or just stubborn. I thought I'd done the right thing. 14 months later, my daughter called me on a Sunday. Not our usual noon call. This was 8 in the morning, and her voice had that particular flatness I recognized from when her mother was sick, that voice people use when they're trying to hold themselves very still. She said Scott had lost his job. The company had restructured in Q3, and his entire division had been eliminated. He'd known for 6 weeks but hadn't wanted to worry anyone. He had 2 more weeks of severance and then nothing. They had about 4 months of savings. They were okay for now, but she wanted me to know. I said I was sorry. I said I was sure he'd find something. I asked if they needed anything. She said no, they were fine. She just wanted to keep me in the loop. I hung up and sat with that for a long moment. I went to my files and pulled out the copy of the mortgage agreement. I read through the cosigner clause. I read through the separate agreement I'd had Scott sign. Then I went to my computer and checked my credit report. Because as a cosigner it showed up there too. Everything was current. Payments made. No flags. I told myself I was being paranoid. I took my car in for its oil change. I mowed the lawn. I called Pam the following Sunday at noon, and we talked about whether she was thinking of going back to work. And she said maybe, that Scott had a few leads, that things were moving in a good direction. She sounded more like herself. 6 weeks after that, I drove past a dealership on Route 40 on my way to my cardiologist appointment, and I saw a silver SUV in the lot that made me slow down without quite knowing why. It was a GMC Yukon Denali, brand new. The sticker in the window said $87,000. I don't know why I pulled in, some instinct. I described the vehicle to the salesman, said I was looking for something similar, asked what the usual payment structure was on a vehicle like that. He walked me through it. He mentioned that they'd sold 2 of those in the last couple of months, both to buyers who'd financed through a third-party lender because their primary bank credit wasn't quite there. I left without buying anything. I sat in my car in the parking lot for a few minutes. I didn't jump to conclusions. I told myself it was a common enough vehicle. I told myself I was reading into things because I was scared. I told myself a man who'd just lost his job wouldn't go buy an $87,000 truck. Then I drove to my daughter's house. The Yukon Denali was in the driveway. Silver. New plates. I sat outside for a long moment before I rang the bell. Scott answered. He was wearing a Buckeyes hoodie and holding a coffee mug, and he looked perfectly comfortable in a way that men look when they haven't left the house in a while. He seemed surprised to see me. Not alarmed, surprised. I said I was just passing through, thought I'd stop in. He let me in. Pam came out of the kitchen and hugged me. She seemed nervous, though she covered it well. We sat in their living room, and Scott talked about a consulting opportunity he was exploring. And Pam brought out coffee, and they were both so careful, so normal, so deliberately relaxed, that I understood something was happening that I wasn't being told about. I asked about the truck. Scott said it was a lease, a good deal, practically paid for itself as a business write-off once the consulting picked up. He said it like it was a minor thing, a footnote. I looked at my daughter when he said that. She looked at her coffee. I'm not a man who lets things fester. I've never believed in waiting and hoping a problem resolves itself. So when I got home, I called my attorney and told him what I'd seen and what I suspected. He listened carefully and then told me what I already knew, that I needed to know whether the mortgage was being paid, and I could check that through my own credit report. And if it was being paid currently, there wasn't much to be done. But I should document everything. I documented everything. Dates, conversations, what I saw. I kept a file. The mortgage stayed current for 3 more months. On the first day of the 4th month, I got an alert from my credit monitoring service that a payment had been missed. I called my daughter immediately. She said it was a clerical error. Scott was handling it. The 2nd month, another alert. This time Pam didn't pick up. She texted me 4 hours later. We're working on it, Dad. Don't worry. I called my attorney. He sent a formal letter to Scott and Pam reminding them of the separate agreement they'd signed, noting the cosigner, liability, requesting immediate communication. Scott replied 2 weeks later with an email saying he appreciated my concern and was committed to resolving the situation and would have good news soon. He had borrowed $40,000 from his parents in Arizona. He caught up the payments. I got an alert that the account was current again. Iskes hailed. I told myself we'd gotten through it. That was 2 weeks before Thanksgiving. I should tell you what I felt, standing in that entryway with my car keys in my hand. I've thought about it a lot since then. The first thing I felt was something cold and quiet, like a room with all the heat turned off. Not anger, not yet. Something more like recognition. The feeling of a thing you've suspected being confirmed, solidifying from vapor into something hard you can hold in your hand. My son-in-law didn't hate me. That was the thing I understood in that moment, standing there before he saw me. He didn't hate me. He just didn't think of me at all. I was a resource he'd used and would use again if he needed to. A signature on a piece of paper, an old man with a paid-off house, and a careful retirement and a daughter who loved him more than she knew how to say no to him. I walked back to my car. I sat in it for a moment. Then I drove home. I didn't cry. I made a pot of coffee and sat at the kitchen table where Eleanor and I used to make our Sunday calls. And I opened my file and I started making notes. Scott called at 9:30 that night. I let it go to voicemail. He left a message that was mostly stumbling and apologies and explanations that I didn't listen to all the way through. Pam called at 10. I let that go to voicemail too. I wasn't ready to talk to them yet. I needed to think clearly. I needed to know what I was going to do. The Monday after Thanksgiving, I called my attorney and told him what had happened at the dinner. I told him about the toast. I told him I was done co-signing this loan and I needed to know what my options were. He said the options were limited while the mortgage was current. I couldn't simply remove my name from a co-signed loan without the primary borrower refinancing and qualifying on their own. But there were things I could do. I could formalize my intent to exit the agreement and notify the lender of the circumstances. I could update my own estate documents to protect my assets from any future claim. I could stop being a silent guarantor and start being a documented one. Every payment, every missed alert, every communication, so that if this went sideways in court, I had a paper trail that established I had tried. I did all of those things. I also called the estate attorney, who'd handled Eleanor's will and mine. I updated my documents. I made changes I had been putting off for 2 years, because making them felt final, felt like something I could do after Eleanor, but didn't want to do while I was still grieving. I did them now. It took 3 hours. When I left the attorney's office, I went to the diner 2 blocks down that Eleanor and I used to go to after church, and I sat in our usual booth and I had a piece of peach pie and a decaf coffee, and I let myself feel what I hadn't let myself feel since I was standing in that entryway. I cried, actually, not loudly, just sitting there in the booth with the pie and the old tablecloth pattern I'd looked at 50 times. Crying for Eleanor, mostly. Crying because she had seen this and I hadn't listened. Crying because my daughter was so in love with a man who toasted to my absence that she looked at me across that room and calculated instead of coming to me. I left the waitress a good tip and I drove home. Pam called 6 more times that week. I answered on the Friday. She said Scott felt terrible. She said he'd had too much to drink, and it was meant to be a joke, and he hadn't known I was standing there. She said she hoped I understood it didn't reflect how they actually felt. I let her finish. Then I said, Pam, I co-signed a mortgage on a house that went into default twice in the last year. While your husband was missing payments, he was leasing a truck that costs more than some people's houses. When I showed up at your door on Thanksgiving, he gave a toast to my absence in front of people I've never met, and you saw me standing there, and you did not move. She was quiet. I'm not calling to fight, I said. I'm calling to tell you that I love you, that I will always love you, that you are the piece of your mother I have left in this world, and that matters to me more than you know. But I will not be treated this way, and I am done pretending otherwise. She started to cry. She said she was sorry. She said I was right. She said things had been hard and she didn't know how to tell me. I said, you could have told me. I was always going to answer the phone. We didn't say much after that. I told her I needed some time. She said she understood. I meant it about loving her. I meant all of it. What happened next didn't happen fast. That's the thing about real life. It doesn't resolve in the tidy way of a movie. The mortgage didn't suddenly collapse. Scott didn't immediately face a consequence that satisfied anyone's idea of justice. Things moved the way they actually move, which is slowly and with a lot of paperwork. Scott's consulting work never materialized into anything stable. By February, they were struggling again. My attorney received a communication from their bank notifying me, as co-signer, that the account was being flagged for review. This time I didn't exhale. This time I was ready. I had a meeting with my attorney and a financial advisor. We put together a formal demand letter, invoking the private agreement Scott had signed. The one that said if the loan went into distress due to their financial decisions, I was entitled to restitution for any damage to my credit or assets. It also required them to begin the process of refinancing the loan to remove my name, or I would pursue legal action. Scott ignored the first letter. He responded to the second one, through his own attorney, with a counter-argument that the agreement wasn't enforceable because I had signed it under coercion. Which was not only false but remarkably bold, coming from a man who had asked me to lunch at a steakhouse and presented me with a co-signing request before the ribeye arrived. I did not blink. My attorney filed suit in March. It was not a dramatic lawsuit. It was a civil matter that would have bored most people to tears. But it accomplished what it was meant to accomplish. It put Scott and Pam in the position of having to refinance or defend their inaction in court. They refinanced. They barely qualified on their own. They lost the Yukon Denali around the same time. I don't know if they returned it or if it was repossessed, and I did not ask. They moved to a smaller apartment in a neighboring suburb when the house sold for less than they owed on it, and the gap between what they got and what they owed came out of the settlement. My name came off the loan in April. I'm telling you this not because I want you to feel sorry for me. I don't need that. I'm 67 years old, and I have a pension and a paid-off house and a maple tree in the front yard that Eleanor planted, and most mornings that is enough. I'm telling you this because of what I said to Pam on that Friday phone call, the thing I keep coming back to. I was always going to answer the phone. My daughter called me in June. She called on a Sunday at noon, which she hadn't done in months. I answered. She wasn't calling to talk about Scott, or the house, or the lawsuit. She wasn't calling to relitigate any of it. She called to tell me that she'd started working again. Part-time, administrative work at a clinic near her apartment. She said it felt good. She said she'd forgotten how much she liked having something that was hers. We talked for an hour. At one point, she said, Mom would have something to say about all of this. I said, she'd say she told me so. Pam laughed at that. It sounded like her real laugh, the one I've known since she was 4 years old. It sounded like Eleanor's, a little. We still talk every Sunday. Not always at noon, she's got a schedule now, but we talk. I still sit at the kitchen table with my coffee. I still look out at the maple tree. I still keep my files careful and my documents current and my door unlocked when I'm expecting someone. But I listen to my instincts now. I think about Eleanor getting quiet in that particular way of hers, and I don't talk myself out of it anymore. I should have started that a long time ago.